Hello, it's Dawn Michelle from Boho Tarot, and I'd like to invite you on another journey to transforming the tarot. Today we will be repurposing the Akashic Tarot and turning it into a handmade intention and meditation deck. Like the good tarot that we did last time, I talked quite a bit about my struggles with this deck in my final deck collection video. Unlike the good tarot, however, this was a deck that I had a lot of issues with, and it really went beyond just not being able to connect with the cards. I won't go into that in this video because I already talked about it in my deck collection video, and if you want to check that out, I will link it below. So long story short, this deck didn't work out for me, and I knew that it wasn't going to be a deck that I was ever going to read with again, but the cardstock on this deck is lovely. And I really like the backs. It's just the fronts that I have issue with. So I thought I would try to find a way to use them in another project because they are a great quality cardstock. So making a personal intention and meditation deck is something that I've been toying with for a really long time. I just could never really solidify how I wanted to go about doing it. Did I want to create the images and then have it printed, or maybe just, draw them on some cardstock from the get-go? But none of those options really seemed to fit, although I can't really say why. I just wasn't inspired to create them in this more traditional process. So a few months ago, I was working in one of my journals and doing some collaging, and this deck was still sitting on my desk because I hadn't quite figured out what I was going to do with it yet. And for some reason, I just decided to grab one of the cards out of the deck, and I just started collaging over the top of it. Like, it was this really meditative and intuitive process. I didn't really think about what it was going to be or what it was going to represent or even what I was going to do with it when I was done. I just let the art emerge as it wanted to in this completely organic way. So when I was done, I had this beautiful card, and to me, it felt like this card was a call to focus on grounding. So I added this title to it, and then I set it aside and I immediately reached for another card. So this entire process and these few cards that I've done so far has been a really wonderful, creative, and mindful experience. So then I started pulling these cards into my practice as meditation tools and such. And because they are a very personal and creative reflection of my soul, really, they have become a beautiful part of my practice. It's not a project that I'm rushing through. I do these cards as I feel called to do them, and I let this whole process of creating these cards evolve naturally. So for this process, we'll basically be collaging over the top of cards and covering them in this clear contact paper to seal the fronts of them. So I won't be doing the entire deck. As I said, I like to work with these cards as I feel inspired to do so, but we'll create a couple so you can see my process, and then maybe you can do your own meditation and intention deck if you feel called to do so. So I look forward to having you join me on this journey today as we transform the Akashic Tarot. To start out with, I just want to show you the tools that I will be using. I have, of course, the deck I will be recreating or repurposing. You can use any deck. It really doesn't matter. The thing I like about the oracles is they are a bigger size so that you have more room to actually collage on the front of the card. And they tend to be a bit sturdier, and they tend to have a little bit thicker cardstock, at least in the mass market. There are some indie decks that have just as thick matte cardstock as some of the mass market oracles, but as far as using a deck that is nice and sturdy and has a lot of surface space to work on, I just find that the oracles work better. And for this, you really want a pretty thick cardstock, because even though you're going to be adding layers to it, which is going to make it thicker, you do want to have some stability there to start with, because you're going to be gluing and adding contact paper and all of that. So these are going to get really thick. But if you don't have kind of a substantial base, you're going to end up with your glue and whatnot seeping through to the backside of your cards, and sometimes that can warp the cards. Speaking of glue, I recommend this Fabri-Tac. I use this for most of my paper projects. I also use it for my fabric projects as well. But this, for the most part, works on just about any sort of paper. If the paper is really, really thin, you may get some bubbling or some wrinkling, but in general, it works really beautiful on paper. It dries pretty quickly, so it doesn't, there's not a lot of forgiveness with it, so you kind of have to be careful. But anyway, it works really beautifully and holds really well. I've really never had anything that I've glued with Fabri-Tac come back up. Of course, we have scissors for cutting paper and whatnot, our contact paper for when we go to recover the deck, and then I have a variety of papers and just scrapbooky stuff. I have a whole nother bin on the floor beside me, which is big and huge and couldn't fit it on my table. So this is kind of just what we just wanted to go over. The supplies that I will be using, you know, you can use anything you want. Some of this is magazine cutouts, some of it is scrapbook paper. This, for example, is a sheet of scrapbook paper. I also have some fabric in here. I have, what all do I have in here? I have, you know, ephemera that I have purchased. This is one of the Tim Holtz collections. You know, little scraps of things. I even have some pressed flowers and herbs in here for different projects. Probably won't use them in this project. But yeah, just, you know, a majority of things. Anything that you can basically rip up, you can, or cut up, you can use and put on your card. So go with what, you know, what moves you, what inspires you. So this was the little collection of pieces and parts that I was working on the first time, so I will probably pull this out, and then we'll just go with the flow as we work our way through the cards. Like I said, I don't ever have a process. I don't ever have an intention for these cards really so much. I just kind of go through the papers until I find something that calls to me, and then that goes on the card, and I just kind of layer from there. So it's a completely intuitive and sort of organic process. Although you could certainly plan out your your images or what you're collaging on the card as well. There's nothing wrong with that. That's just not how I'm doing this particular deck, although I have done that before. So yeah, so let's go ahead and I'll move all of this out of the way so that we actually have some space to work. Okay, so to start with, I've just pulled this little package that from the last time I was working with these cards. And I'm just going to pull a couple of these cards. Maybe we'll do like 3 of them, maybe. How many do I have here? 1, 2, 3. We'll do 3, maybe. We'll see if that's too ambitious. We'll see how long this takes. Like I said, I didn't really pay much attention before to, you know, the whole process. It just kind of evolved as it evolved. So, these, as you can see, these are pretty sturdy cards. They have a beautiful matte cardstock. The other great thing about working with a matte cardstock is that the glue adheres to it a little bit better than it does a glossy cardstock, although this Fabri-Tac will adhere to glossy as well. It just works, it just holds a little bit better on this. I have given some thought to maybe sanding the fronts of it just to give it a bit more to hold onto, but I'm not having an issue with the glue sticking to these, so I'm not going to do that just because it's one more step that I just don't really need to do. I do like the backs of these cards, so I'm not going to touch those. I'm going to leave them as they are. So I'm going to stop babbling and just work my way through a couple of the cards, and you can see how this organic process really just kind of comes about. There's really no rhyme or reason to it. It's just whatever appeals, whatever floats my boat in the moment. Okay, so I finished up my 3 cards here, and I've let them kind of sit and dry for a few minutes just to make sure that that glue is good and set on there. I do have a couple little places where the paper is sort of lifting, where I didn't quite get it glued down to the corners, and that's okay because we're going to cover it with contact paper anyway, which is going to give it this protective layer over the top of it. So I'm going to show you just real quick. We'll just go through that process of how I do that. I do it basically as I would if I were backing a deck, right? Regardless of whether you're doing, you know, the front or the back. The process, oh, I got some glue there. The process is pretty much the same either way. For this, I'll be using the clear contact paper because obviously I don't want to cover up what I just made. So we'll just go through the process and you can see how I cover the front of these with the contact paper. So you can see here is the final card, and it is nicely covered in contact paper, and the back still looks fine. So that is basically the whole process from start to finish. So I'm going to finish up these 2 cards here, and then we'll come back and take a look at the final product. So here we have our final 3 cards, which have been completely collaged and covered in clear contact paper to protect them. So here we have this beautiful one that says, "Wherever life plants you, bloom with grace." Love that message, it's beautiful. And this one I created as a metamorphosis card, which I think is beautiful for transitions and that sort of messages. And then we have this one for new beginnings. So I just kind of go with the flow and create them as, you know, whatever catches my eye and catches my attention. That's kind of how I work with it. So definitely something if you are interested in doing. You can see that it doesn't take a whole lot of artistic talent to do it. You're just ripping up paper and gluing them to a tarot card. So thank you for joining me today, and I hope you enjoyed this process of transforming the Akashic Tarot into a meditation and intention deck. I look forward to seeing you again soon for more creative tarot for an inspired life.